Blackwater Lake sat at the edge of a small, forgotten town. The lake looked ordinary during the day. The water was calm. The trees stood silent around the shoreline. Nothing seemed unusual. But after sunset, everything changed. Visitors rarely stayed long. Travelers passing through town noticed something strange. Nobody wanted to talk about the lake. Whenever its name came up, conversations ended. People changed the subject. Some simply walked away. Others looked genuinely afraid. For years, stories had circulated through the town. Stories of voices drifting across the water at night. Stories of names whispered from the darkness. Stories of people hearing loved ones who had died years before. Most outsiders dismissed the stories. The townspeople did not. One rainy autumn evening, a journalist named Daniel Hart arrived in town. Daniel specialized in strange mysteries. He had spent years investigating disappearances, legends, and unexplained events. When he heard rumors about Blackwater Lake, he became curious. The stories sounded impossible. That made them impossible to ignore. The first thing Daniel noticed was the atmosphere. The town felt frozen in time. Old buildings lined empty streets. Store owners watched strangers carefully. Even during the day, an uneasy feeling lingered in the air. Daniel checked into a small motel. The woman at the front desk handed him a key. Before he walked away, he asked a simple question. "How far is Blackwater Lake?" The woman's expression changed instantly. Her smile disappeared. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she quietly pointed toward the northern road. "About 5 miles." Daniel nodded. "Do people really hear voices out there?" The woman stared at him. Then she lowered her voice. "Some questions are better left unanswered." She refused to say anything else. That evening, Daniel visited a local diner. He hoped someone would talk. An elderly man sat alone near the window. Daniel introduced himself. The man listened patiently. Then Daniel mentioned the lake. The old man's hands stopped moving. His eyes fixed on the table. "You should leave that place alone," Daniel asked why. The man shook his head. "Because it listens." The answer made no sense. Before Daniel could ask another question, the man stood up and left. Later that night, Daniel reviewed old records online. Most information about Blackwater Lake was surprisingly limited. There were reports of accidents, several drownings, a few disappearances, nothing unusual for a large lake. Yet something felt wrong. The records seemed incomplete. Entire years contained almost no information. It was as if parts of the lake's history had been erased. Around midnight, Daniel decided to visit the shoreline himself. The road leading to the lake was empty. Fog drifted between the trees. The deeper he drove, the quieter the world became. Soon he reached a small wooden dock. The lake stretched endlessly into darkness. Moonlight reflected across the surface. Daniel stepped onto the dock. The air felt colder than before. He set up a camera, a digital recorder, and a notebook. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The water remained perfectly still. No sounds, no movement, no voices. Daniel began to wonder if the stories were exaggerated. Then a sound broke the silence, a distant splash. He turned toward the lake. Nothing was there. A few minutes later, another sound echoed across the water. This time it sounded closer. Daniel scanned the shoreline. Still nothing. Then the wind stopped. Everything became completely silent. The silence felt unnatural, as if the entire forest had stopped breathing. Daniel suddenly felt watched. The sensation grew stronger every second. His heartbeat quickened. The darkness over the water seemed deeper now, almost alive. Then he heard it. A voice, soft, barely louder than a whisper. At first he thought he imagined it, then it came again, clearer this time. The voice was calling a name. His name. Daniel. He froze. The voice drifted across the lake, neither male nor female, just a whisper emerging from the darkness. Daniel. His stomach tightened. Nobody should have known he was there. Nobody was visible anywhere near the dock. Yet the voice sounded close. Very close. Daniel grabbed his flashlight. The beam swept across the black water. Nothing. Only endless darkness. Then the whisper came one final time. "Daniel." The sound seemed to come from directly behind him. He spun around. The dock was empty. The forest stood silent. No footprints. No movement. No person. Only darkness. Daniel stared into the shadows, trying to understand what he had heard. Then his recorder emitted a sudden burst of static. The device switched itself on. Without warning, a distorted voice crackled through the speaker. One sentence emerged from the noise. A sentence that made Daniel's blood run cold. Because the voice spoke only 4 words. Leave before it remembers. Daniel did not sleep that night. The voice replayed in his mind again and again. Leave before it remembers. The words made no sense, yet something about them felt important. As dawn approached, Daniel listened to the recording from the dock. The whisper calling his name was there, clearer than he remembered. The final message was there too. The voice sounded distorted, almost mechanical, but it was undeniably real. Someone or something had spoken. The next morning, Daniel began searching through local records. One name appeared repeatedly: Thomas Grayson, a fisherman who disappeared 12 years earlier. According to official reports, Thomas drowned during a storm. His boat was found drifting near the northern shore. His body was never recovered. Case closed. At least officially. But the deeper Daniel looked, the stranger the story became. Several witnesses claimed the weather had been calm that night. No storm had been reported. No strong winds. No dangerous conditions. The official explanation did not fit. Daniel decided to visit Thomas's family. His daughter Emily still lived in town. She answered the door cautiously. When Daniel explained his investigation, she hesitated. Then she invited him inside. Old photographs covered the walls. Most featured Thomas smiling beside enormous fish. He looked like an ordinary man, a devoted father, someone unlikely to vanish without explanation. Emily listened quietly as Daniel described the official report. Then she shook her head. My father didn't drown. Daniel asked why she believed that. Emily disappeared into another room. When she returned, she carried a worn cardboard box. Inside were dozens of photographs. Most had never been shown publicly. Thomas had taken them during his fishing trips. Emily spread them across the table. At first they appeared normal. Lake views, boats, sunsets, wildlife. Then Daniel noticed one image. His attention locked onto it instantly. The photograph showed Thomas standing on his boat. Behind him stretched the dark surface of Blackwater Lake. But something else appeared in the distance. A figure, a human-shaped silhouette, standing far from shore, standing where no person should have been able to stand, directly on the water. Daniel stared at the image. The figure was blurry, yet unmistakable. A person, motionless, watching. Emily noticed his reaction. That's the last photo he ever took. Daniel looked up. What happened after this? Emily swallowed nervously. He came home terrified. Daniel leaned forward. What did he say? Emily's voice became quiet. He kept asking if anyone had followed him. A chill moved through Daniel. He said something was out there. What kind of something? Emily shook her head. He never explained. She opened a small notebook. The pages belonged to her father. Several entries were heavily damaged. Others remained readable. One sentence appeared repeatedly, written over and over, almost obsessively. They're not echoes, they're conversations. Daniel read the words several times. They raised more questions than answers. What does this mean? Emily looked toward the window. I don't know. She paused. But after he took that photograph, he stopped fishing at night. Why? He said the voices had changed. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. What voices? Emily's face lost color. The voices from the lake. Silence filled the room. Outside, rain began tapping against the glass. Daniel examined the remaining photographs. Most showed ordinary scenes. Then, another image caught his eye. A dock, fog, dark water, and standing near the edge of the frame, Thomas himself. Except something was wrong. Very wrong. The picture had been taken weeks before his disappearance. Yet Thomas appeared older. Not slightly older. Years older. His hair was gray. His face was thinner, as though the photograph showed a future version of him. Daniel checked the date. The timestamp was correct. The image should have been impossible. Emily noticed his confusion. My father saw that picture too. What did he think? He burned every copy. Daniel looked at the photograph again. Why keep this one? Emily hesitated. Because he missed one. The room suddenly felt colder. Daniel carefully placed the image back onto the table. Everything about Blackwater Lake seemed to revolve around time. Voices, memories, photographs. Nothing behaved normally. Before leaving, Daniel asked one final question. Did your father ever mention a specific place on the lake? Emily nodded slowly. The Northern Channel. What's there? No one goes there anymore. Why not? Emily looked directly at him, because that's where people hear their own voices. That evening, Daniel drove toward the northern shoreline. The road narrowed as trees crowded closer. Fog drifted through the forest. Soon, he reached an abandoned boat launch. No houses, no lights, no signs of life, only the lake and silence. Daniel stepped out of his vehicle. The air felt unnaturally cold. As he approached the water, something caught his attention. Fresh footprints, leading toward the shoreline. One set, single person, no return tracks. The footprints simply ended at the water's edge. Daniel followed them carefully. His flashlight illuminated wet mud, broken reeds, then nothing. No boat, no body, no explanation. The tracks stopped as if the person had walked directly into the lake. Suddenly, his recorder activated inside his pocket. Static filled the speaker. Daniel slowly removed the device. The screen flashed unexpectedly. A new recording had appeared. Created only seconds earlier. His hands trembled slightly. He pressed play. At first, there was silence. Then came a familiar voice. His own voice. But he had never spoken the words. "Don't go deeper." Daniel stared at the recorder. The message continued. "If you're hearing this..." Static interrupted the audio. Several seconds passed. Then the final sentence emerged. A sentence spoken in his own voice. A sentence that froze him in place. Thomas wasn't the first. Daniel stood motionless beside the shoreline. The recorder remained in his hand. His own voice had spoken words he had never said. The message felt impossible, yet the evidence existed. The recording was real. The drive back to town felt longer than usual. Questions filled his mind. How could a recorder capture words that had never been spoken? And who was Thomas referring to when he wrote that the echoes were conversations? The next morning, Daniel began a new experiment. If the lake produced voices, he wanted proof. He gathered 3 digital recorders, fresh batteries, new memory cards, nothing that could be blamed on faulty equipment. Just before sunset, he returned to Blackwater Lake. This time he placed the recorders at different locations, one near the abandoned dock, one beside the northern channel, and one deeper in the forest overlooking the shoreline. Then he waited. Hours passed. Nothing happened. No whispers, no strange figures, only wind moving through the trees. Around midnight, Daniel collected the devices and returned to his motel. He locked the door, closed the curtains, and began reviewing the recordings. The first recorder contained mostly silence, occasional waves, distant birds, nothing unusual. The second recorder was different. At exactly 11:17 p.m., a faint voice appeared. A woman's voice, soft and frightened. Daniel increased the volume. The voice became clearer. "Please help us." The words repeated twice. Then the recording ended. Daniel checked local records. The voice meant nothing to him. He moved to the third recorder. At first, it sounded normal. Then another voice emerged. An elderly man. The audio quality was poor, but Daniel managed to understand several words. "We never left." Silence followed. Then came something unexpected. A date. October 14th, 1978. Daniel immediately searched newspaper archives. His stomach tightened. October 14th, 1978, was the night a local schoolteacher disappeared near Blackwater Lake. The man's body had never been found. Yet the voice on the recording sounded exactly like the teacher in an old television interview Daniel located online. The match was disturbing. But the next discovery was worse. Much worse. Daniel continued reviewing audio throughout the night. By sunrise, he had collected dozens of voices. Men, women, children. Some sounded frightened. Others sounded confused. Many repeated the same questions. "Can anybody hear me? Where are we? Why can't we leave?" The voices spanned decades. Some belonged to people confirmed dead. Others belonged to missing persons. Daniel could hardly believe what he was hearing. The lake appeared to be preserving them somehow. Or something far stranger was happening. Later that afternoon, Daniel visited the town library. He hoped older records might reveal a pattern. Instead, he found resistance. The librarian became visibly nervous when Blackwater Lake was mentioned. She refused to answer questions. Several other visitors quietly left the room. The entire town seemed terrified. As Daniel prepared to leave, an elderly woman approached him. She moved slowly with the help of a cane. Her eyes remained fixed on him. "I know who you are." Daniel nodded. "I've been asking questions." The woman glanced toward the window. You've been asking the wrong questions. Daniel invited her to sit. For a long moment, she remained silent. Then she leaned closer. The voices aren't trapped. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? They don't belong to the lake. Daniel felt a chill. Then where do they come from? The woman lowered her voice. Different times. Silence followed. Daniel studied her carefully. Different times. She nodded. The lake remembers everything. The exact words he had heard before. The same warning. Daniel pressed further. What happened here? The woman looked afraid. Genuinely afraid. The lake listens. Daniel waited. The lake learns. She paused. And eventually, her voice nearly disappeared. It answers. A cold feeling settled in Daniel's stomach. Before he could ask another question, the woman stood. She placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Then she walked away. Daniel unfolded it. Inside was a rough map of Blackwater Lake. One area had been circled repeatedly in red ink. The deepest section, near the northern channel. A single sentence was written beneath it. They hear us too. Daniel stared at the message. A terrible possibility entered his mind. What if the voices weren't recordings? What if they were real conversations? Conversations occurring across time itself. That evening, Daniel returned to his motel room. Rain hammered against the windows. Thunder rolled across the sky. As he organized his notes, a sound emerged from his laptop speakers. A voice. The audio program was closed. Nothing should have been playing, yet the voice continued. Weak, distant, almost hidden beneath static. Daniel froze. Slowly he turned toward the screen. The voice grew clearer. A child. Crying. Then speaking. He's coming. Daniel's pulse quickened. The voice continued. Tell Daniel not to go. The room went silent. Daniel stared at the laptop. His name again. Someone knew he was investigating. Or something did. Then the screen flickered. For a fraction of a second, a reflection appeared. A dark figure standing behind him. Daniel spun around instantly. The room was empty. No one stood there. Nothing moved. His breathing became heavy. When he looked back at the laptop, the reflection was gone. But a new audio file had appeared on the desktop. He had never created it. The file name consisted of only 4 words. A date. Tomorrow's date. With shaking hands, Daniel opened the recording. Static filled the room. Then came a sound. A gunshot. A terrified scream. And finally a voice. His own voice. Screaming in panic. Before the recording abruptly ended, Daniel replayed the recording again and again. The gunshot. The scream. His own voice. Every second sounded real. Too real. The recording carried tomorrow's date. A date that had not happened yet. Daniel barely slept. By morning, he had made a decision. If Blackwater Lake was somehow connected to these impossible recordings, he needed to explore the area marked on the map, the deepest section, near the northern channel. The place the elderly woman had circled repeatedly. Daniel contacted a professional diver named Marcus Reed. Marcus had worked on underwater recovery operations for years. He did not believe in ghost stories. That was exactly why Daniel wanted him involved. By noon, they were standing beside the lake. Daniel explained only the basics. Missing people. Strange history. An area he wanted examined. Marcus listened patiently, then he laughed. You brought me here because of local legends? Daniel handed him the map. Marcus studied it. The deepest section is over 100 feet down. Can you reach it? Marcus nodded. Assuming there's something worth finding. The boat moved slowly across the water. Fog drifted around them. The lake seemed unusually quiet. Even the birds were absent. When they reached the marked location, Marcus prepared his equipment. The water beneath them looked almost black, like an endless void. Minutes later, Marcus disappeared beneath the surface. Daniel watched the bubbles vanish. Then he waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. 30. Finally, the diver resurfaced. But something was wrong. Marcus looked pale, disturbed, as if he had seen something unexpected. Daniel helped him back onto the boat. What happened? Marcus removed his mask. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he pointed toward the water. There's a structure down there. Daniel leaned forward. What kind of structure? A cabin. The answer stunned him. A cabin should not exist at that depth. Yet Marcus seemed certain. It looks old. How old? Decades at least. Daniel immediately asked another question. Can you go back down? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. The second dive began. This time, Marcus carried an underwater camera. The wait felt endless. Eventually, he resurfaced again. Daniel grabbed the camera. The footage revealed a shocking sight. A wooden cabin sat on the lake bed. Its roof had partially collapsed. Windows were shattered. The structure looked abandoned for generations, yet it remained surprisingly intact. Daniel continued reviewing the footage. The camera moved through a broken doorway. Dust floated through the water. Old furniture remained inside. A table, chairs, a rusted lantern. Then the camera focused on the wall. Symbols covered the wooden boards. Dozens of them. Strange markings carved deeply into the surface. Daniel had never seen anything like them. Neither had Marcus. What do they mean? Marcus shook his head. No idea. The footage continued. Then suddenly, the camera jerked violently. The image blurred. A loud metallic sound echoed through the recording. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel looked up. What was that? Marcus swallowed. His hands trembled slightly. It came from beneath me. Silence filled the boat. Below the cabin? Marcus nodded. The knocks were under the lake bed. Daniel stared at him. That's impossible. I know. What caused them? Marcus looked toward the water. His face had lost all color. I don't want to know. For the first time since meeting him, the diver looked frightened. Genuinely frightened. Daniel reviewed the footage again. This time, he noticed something strange. The knocking started precisely when the camera pointed at a section of the floor. Almost as if something below had reacted. As if it knew it was being watched. The discovery raised even more questions. Had the cabin fallen into the lake naturally, or had it been placed there deliberately? Back on shore, Daniel began researching old maps. Hours later, he found what he was looking for. A survey map from nearly 80 years earlier. The cabin appeared clearly marked, but there was a problem. The cabin had originally stood on dry land, far from the shoreline. Daniel compared the map to modern charts. His confusion deepened. The lake had expanded decades ago. Large sections of forest had disappeared beneath rising water. Entire structures had been submerged. Yet no public records mentioned the cabin. It had simply vanished from history. Almost as if someone wanted it forgotten. Late that evening, Daniel visited the local archives. Most records were ordinary. Property documents, tax records, construction permits. Then he discovered a missing file. The cabin's ownership records had been removed. Not lost, removed. Someone had intentionally taken them. The librarian became nervous when Daniel asked about it. She refused to discuss the matter. As he prepared to leave, a folded newspaper clipping slipped from an old folder. The article was dated 52 years earlier. Its headline immediately caught his attention. Local family disappears overnight. Daniel quickly read the article. A family of 4 had lived in the cabin. One morning, they were simply gone. No signs of struggle. No evidence of travel. No bodies. No explanation. Neighbors claimed strange lights appeared near the property during the nights before the disappearance. Authorities never solved the case. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. Another disappearance connected to Blackwater Lake. Another mystery hidden from public attention. As darkness fell, Daniel returned to his motel room. He spread photographs across the bed. The cabin. The symbols. The disappearances. The voices. Everything seemed connected, but he still couldn't see the full picture. Then his phone vibrated. An unknown number. No caller information. Daniel answered cautiously. For several seconds, only static filled the line. Then a voice spoke. A terrified male voice. Weak. Distant. Almost underwater. Daniel? He froze. The voice continued. Don't go back. His pulse raced. Who is this? Static answered. Then the voice returned. This time Daniel recognized it. It belonged to Marcus, the diver. But Marcus was supposed to be at home, safe. Yet the voice sounded terrified, as if he were trapped somewhere, far away. Then came the final sentence. A sentence that made Daniel's blood run cold. Something knocked back. The line disconnected. Seconds later, Daniel's phone rang again. It was Marcus. The real Marcus. Confused. Calm. Completely normal. Daniel answered immediately. Before he could speak, Marcus said something that stopped him cold. Hey, Daniel. I just got home. A pause followed. Then Marcus added 4 chilling words. I never called you. Daniel stared at the phone. Long after the call ended, Marcus claimed he had never called. Yet Daniel had heard his voice. Not a similar voice. Not a distorted voice. Marcus's exact voice. The same tone. The same manner of speaking. And the warning still echoed in his mind. Something knocked back. The next morning, Daniel focused on a mystery that kept appearing in the background of every clue. A disaster the town barely acknowledged. A ferry accident. Whenever old residents mentioned Blackwater Lake, the conversation eventually drifted toward it, then stopped, as if they regretted saying too much. Daniel headed to the town archives. Most newspaper records were available digitally, but older editions had been stored in a locked basement. After hours of searching, he finally found what he needed. A newspaper dated September 3, 1968. The headline covered nearly the entire front page. Tragedy on Blackwater Lake. The article described a ferry carrying dozens of passengers across the lake during a violent storm. According to official reports, the vessel disappeared shortly after midnight. Rescue teams searched for weeks. Only a few pieces of wreckage were recovered. The ferry was never found. Neither were most of the passengers. Daniel continued reading. Something immediately felt wrong. The passenger count changed between articles. One report claimed 32 passengers. Another claimed 38. A third listed 41. The numbers never matched. The inconsistencies continued throughout the files. Witness statements vanished from later reports. Entire paragraphs were removed from updated articles. The deeper Daniel dug, the more obvious it became. Someone had altered the historical record, deliberately. Hours later, Daniel uncovered a forgotten box of documents. The files had not been cataloged, they appeared untouched for decades. Inside was the original passenger manifest. 42 names. Daniel carefully compared the list against town records. Most passengers were officially declared dead, but several names caught his attention because they appeared elsewhere. In recent reports, modern reports. One name belonged to a woman who claimed to see strange lights near Blackwater Lake just 6 years earlier. Another belonged to a man supposedly spotted fishing near the Northern Channel in the late 1990s. That should have been impossible. Both individuals had vanished aboard the ferry in 1968. Daniel checked the reports repeatedly. The names matched perfectly. Birth dates, addresses, everything. Either the records were wrong, or something far stranger had happened. Late that afternoon, Daniel visited an elderly resident named Harold Pierce. Harold was one of the oldest people in town. Rumors suggested he knew more about the ferry disaster than anyone else. When Daniel mentioned the ferry, Harold became quiet. Very quiet. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. Then he looked toward the lake visible through his window. I knew people who were on that boat. Daniel waited. They never came back? Harold slowly shook his head. Some did. Daniel froze. What? Harold sighed heavily. Not officially. The room felt smaller. Daniel leaned forward. What do you mean? The old man stared into space, as though remembering something he wished he could forget. A few weeks after the disaster, people started seeing passengers. Daniel's pulse quickened. Alive. Harold nodded. Walking through town. The silence that followed felt heavy. Daniel struggled to process the statement. The missing passengers? Yes. You're serious? Harold looked offended. I know what I saw. Daniel asked what happened next. Harold's expression darkened. Nobody believed us. Why? Because the sightings made no sense. He paused. The people looked exactly the same. Daniel frowned. Exactly the same? Not older. The words sent a chill through him. Harold continued. They hadn't aged a day. Outside, thunder rumbled across the sky. The old man's eyes remained fixed on the lake. As years passed, the sightings continued. Daniel felt a knot forming in his stomach. How many sightings? More than anyone admits. The answer was unsettling. If true, it meant people who disappeared decades earlier continued appearing around Blackwater Lake. The implications were impossible. Yet impossible had become normal in this investigation. Before leaving, Daniel asked one final question. Why doesn't anyone talk about this? Harold's face tightened. Because people who talk too much disappear. Daniel waited for more, but Harold refused to elaborate. That evening, Daniel returned to the motel. Rain hammered the roof. Wind rattled the windows. As he organized the passenger records, he noticed something peculiar. One name had been highlighted in red ink. Not by him. The mark was old, decades old. The passenger's name was Eleanor Voss. Daniel searched through the remaining files. A photograph eventually appeared. The image showed passengers boarding the ferry hours before it vanished. Families, workers, children, ordinary people. Then Daniel spotted Eleanor. His breath caught, because he had seen her before. Not in the archives, not in the newspapers. He had seen her recently. Very recently. The realization hit him like a wave. She was the woman from the diner. The elderly woman who warned him. The woman who said the lake remembered everything. Daniel grabbed both photographs, the archival image, and a picture he had secretly taken during their meeting. He compared them side by side. The faces matched perfectly. Every feature, every detail, the same person. But that was impossible. The ferry vanished 58 years ago. Eleanor should have been dead, or well over 100 years old. Instead, she appeared exactly as she had in the 1968 photograph. Not older, not younger, exactly the same. Daniel's heart pounded. Suddenly a loud crash echoed outside. He rushed to the window. The storm had intensified. Lightning flashed across the sky. For a brief second, the lake became visible in the distance, and something stood near the shoreline. A woman, motionless, watching the motel. Daniel grabbed his camera. Another flash of lightning illuminated the scene. The woman remained there, unmoving. Daniel zoomed in. The image sharpened. His blood turned cold. It was Eleanor, still wearing the same clothes from the photograph taken in 1968. Then another lightning strike lit the darkness, and dozens of figures appeared behind her, silent, motionless, standing shoulder to shoulder along the edge of Blackwater Lake, watching him. When the darkness returned, they were gone. But moments later, Daniel's recorder switched on by itself. Static filled the room. Then came a voice, a frightened voice from the ferry, a voice recorded 58 years earlier. The message was short, only one sentence, but it changed everything. We never sank. Daniel replayed the message dozens of times. We never sank. The voice sounded terrified, desperate, and completely genuine. If the ferry never sank, then what happened to it? The question haunted him. By now, every clue pointed toward the same area. The deepest section of Blackwater Lake. The northern channel. Whatever happened there had remained hidden for decades. Daniel decided it was time for a larger experiment. One night, complete surveillance. No assumptions. No rumors. Only evidence. He rented additional equipment, 6 cameras, 3 audio recorders, motion sensors, battery packs, everything he could afford. Just before sunset, he returned to the lake. The storm from the previous night had passed. An unnatural calm covered the water. The silence felt wrong, almost staged, as if the lake were waiting. Daniel placed cameras around the shoreline, one near the abandoned dock, one facing the northern channel, 2 overlooking the forest, and 2 positioned near the old boat launch. Each device recorded continuously. By nightfall, the system was operational. Then Daniel waited. Hours crawled by. The lake remained still. Midnight arrived. Nothing. 1 o'clock? Nothing. 2 o'clock. The forest suddenly fell silent. Every insect stopped. Every bird stopped. Even the wind vanished. Daniel immediately noticed. The silence felt familiar. It was the same silence he had experienced during his first night at Blackwater. The silence before the whispers. Then the first motion sensor activated. A sharp beep echoed from the monitoring screen. Daniel looked toward camera 3. The image showed empty shoreline. Nothing visible. Yet the sensor continued triggering. Movement. Repeated movement. Daniel zoomed in. His stomach tightened. Footprints. Fresh footprints appeared in wet mud, one after another. But no person created them. The ground depressed as though invisible feet were walking across it, slowly approaching the water, then stopping. The sensor fell silent. Several minutes later, camera 5 activated. Daniel switched screens. Dense fog covered the area. At first he saw nothing. Then a shape emerged, a dark human figure, motionless. Standing among the mist, another figure appeared, then another, then another. Within seconds, dozens stood along the shoreline, silent silhouettes watching the lake. Daniel checked the live feed from multiple cameras. The figures appeared on every screen. Different locations, same behavior, standing perfectly still, watching. The sight made his skin crawl. Then something changed. One figure moved, slowly. Its head turned toward the camera, directly toward Daniel. as though it knew it was being observed. The screen suddenly filled with static. All 6 cameras failed simultaneously. The monitors went black. Daniel's pulse raced. After several seconds, the feeds returned. The figures were gone. Every one of them. Only empty shoreline remained. Then the audio recorders activated. All 3 at once. A sound emerged from the speakers. At first it resembled wind. Then Daniel realized it was voices. Hundreds of voices. Layered together. Men, women, children, all speaking simultaneously. The noise became overwhelming. Daniel isolated one channel. A woman crying for help, another channel. A man shouting warnings, a third. A child screaming. The recordings continued for nearly 2 minutes. Then the voices abruptly stopped. One voice remained, clearer than all the others. A male voice, terrified, running, breathing heavily. Daniel listened carefully. The voice sounded familiar, very familiar. Then realization struck. It was his own voice. Not similar, not close. Exactly his voice. The recording timestamp displayed a date. 3 days in the future. Daniel felt cold. The future recording continued. Heavy footsteps echoed in the background. Water splashed nearby. Then his future self spoke. Breathless. Panicked. "They found me." The voice continued. "Don't trust the survivor." Static interrupted the message. Then it returned. Louder. More desperate. "They aren't dead." A distant sound echoed behind the voice. A horn. Deep. Mechanical. Ancient. Like a ship emerging from fog. Daniel's heart pounded. "The ferry." The voice lowered into a whisper. "If you're hearing this." Several seconds of static followed. Then came the final sentence. The most disturbing sentence yet. "Something is coming out." The recording ended. Silence returned. Daniel sat motionless, trying to process what he had heard. Then another alert appeared on the monitor. Camera 2 had captured new footage, recorded only seconds earlier. Daniel opened the clip. The image showed the northern channel. Fog drifted across Blackwater. Nothing unusual. Then a shape surfaced, far from shore. At first Daniel assumed it was debris, but the object kept rising, higher, higher, and higher, until he understood what he was seeing. A roof, wooden, collapsed, ancient. The roof of the submerged cabin. Daniel stared in disbelief. The cabin had somehow risen several feet from the lakebed, as though something beneath it was pushing upward. The footage continued. Water churned violently around the structure. Then the camera captured a sound. 3 loud impacts. Knock, knock, knock. The exact same knocking Marcus had heard beneath the cabin. But this time, a 4th sound followed. A response. A knock from somewhere above the water. Knock. Silence filled the recording. Then the camera microphone captured a whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakable. A voice speaking directly into the microphone. A voice Daniel had never heard before. The whisper said only 6 words, and those 6 words made his blood run cold. "It's almost open from below." Daniel barely slept. The footage from the previous night changed everything. The cabin had moved. Something beneath the lake had responded. And now a new warning had appeared. "It's almost open from below." The words repeated in his thoughts all morning. By sunrise, Daniel made a decision. The future recording had mentioned a survivor. Don't trust the survivor. Until now, he assumed there were no survivors from the ferry disaster. But what if that assumption was wrong? He returned to the archives. Hours of searching finally revealed a hidden reference. A witness statement removed from public records decades earlier. One name appeared repeatedly. Walter Briggs. Officially listed as deceased. Unofficially listed as recovered alive 3 days after the ferry vanished. The contradiction was impossible, yet it existed. The report included an address. A remote farmhouse nearly 30 miles from town. Daniel left immediately. The road wound through endless forest. By afternoon, he reached the property. The farmhouse looked abandoned. Paint peeled from the walls. Windows were cracked. The surrounding fields had long since died. Yet smoke drifted from the chimney. Someone was inside. Daniel approached carefully. Before he reached the door, it opened. An old man stood there, thin, pale, and visibly nervous. His eyes widened the moment he saw Daniel, almost as if he had been expecting him. "You're investigating the lake." It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded. The old man's shoulders sagged. "Then you're already too late." Daniel introduced himself. The man simply nodded. "I know who you are." The statement sent a chill through him. They entered the house. Dust covered nearly everything. Newspaper clippings lined the walls. Most involved Blackwater Lake. Disappearances. Accidents. Sightings. Decades of mysteries. Walter Briggs had spent his life tracking them. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Finally, Daniel asked the question. "Were you on the ferry?" Walter stared into the distance, then nodded. The room fell silent. "You survived?" Walter laughed bitterly. A hollow sound. "No." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" The old man looked terrified, truly terrified. The ferry never sank. The same words from the recording. Daniel leaned forward. Then what happened? Walter remained silent. His hands trembled. For nearly a minute he struggled to answer. Then he finally spoke. "We crossed something." The words hung in the air. "What do you mean?" Walter swallowed. "There was fog." His voice had become distant, like someone reliving a nightmare. Thick fog. The lake disappeared. Daniel listened carefully. Then what? The stars disappeared. A chill moved through him. Walter continued. The water became completely still. His eyes drifted toward the window. We couldn't hear anything. Not even the engine. Daniel's pulse quickened. The engine stopped? Walter shook his head. It was still running. The answer made no sense. Then Walter whispered the words that haunted him for decades. We just couldn't hear it anymore. Silence followed. Daniel waited. Walter finally continued. Then we saw lights. What kind of lights? The old man's face turned pale. Lights under the water. Daniel's stomach tightened. Walter looked as though he wanted to stop, but years of fear were finally spilling out. They stretched forever. Like a city. Daniel froze. A city? Walter nodded. Beneath the lake. The room felt colder. Walter rubbed his shaking hands. People rushed to the railings. They were staring down. His breathing became uneven. Then the ferry changed direction. Daniel frowned. No one touched the wheel? Walter shook his head. The ferry turned by itself. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Walter continued. It moved toward the lights. What happened next? The old man's eyes filled with fear. The kind of fear that never leaves. The fog opened. He paused. And we saw it. Daniel felt his heartbeat rising. Saw what? Walter whispered. The doorway. Silence. Heavy. Oppressive. Daniel stared at him. What doorway? Walter looked directly into his eyes. A doorway in the water. The words sounded impossible, yet Walter believed every syllable. It was enormous. Larger than the ferry. Daniel said nothing. The lights were coming through it. Walter's voice nearly broke. And so were the voices. A long silence followed. Daniel finally asked the question. How did you survive? Walter laughed again. The same empty laugh. I didn't. The answer chilled him. Walter stood slowly, then walked to a cabinet. From inside, he removed an old photograph. Daniel examined it. The image showed ferry passengers standing together. Families, workers, children, normal people. Then he noticed Walter. The photograph had been taken in 1968, yet Walter looked exactly the same. Not younger, not older, exactly the same. Daniel's blood ran cold. Walter watched him realize it. I told you, his voice was barely above a whisper. I never survived. Before Daniel could respond, a loud crash erupted outside. Both men jumped. Something had struck the side of the house, hard. Walter immediately turned pale. No. He backed away from the window. No, no, no. Daniel rushed outside. The yard was empty. Wind moved through the grass. Nothing else. Then he noticed something lying near the wall. A wet object. Recently thrown. Daniel picked it up. His heart nearly stopped. It was a life preserver. Ancient. Waterlogged. Covered in algae. Faded letters remained visible across the surface. Blackwater Ferry. Daniel slowly looked toward the distant lake. The farmhouse stood 30 miles away. The life preserver should have been impossible. Then a scream erupted from inside. Walter. Daniel sprinted back into the house. The room was empty. Walter had vanished. No broken windows. No open doors. No footprints. Nothing. Only a single object remained on the floor. A cassette tape, with Daniel's name written on it. His hands shook as he pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Walter's voice emerged. Calm, resigned. As though he had recorded the message long ago. Daniel. A pause followed. You found me too late. Daniel felt cold. The recording continued. The ferry is returning. His pulse raced. Walter spoke one final sentence. The sentence that changed the entire investigation. The passengers are returning with it. Walter Briggs was gone. No signs of a struggle. No evidence of an escape. One moment, he had been standing inside the farmhouse. The next moment he had vanished, just like so many others connected to Blackwater Lake. But he had left something behind. A warning. The ferry is returning. And worse, the passengers are returning with it. Daniel drove back to Blackwater before dawn. Storm clouds gathered overhead. The lake looked darker than ever, almost restless. The surface no longer appeared calm. Small waves rolled across the water, even though there was almost no wind. Something felt different, as if the lake itself were changing. Daniel contacted Marcus immediately. At first, the diver refused. After everything he had experienced, he wanted nothing more to do with Blackwater. But when Daniel showed him Walter's photograph and the evidence surrounding the ferry, Marcus reluctantly agreed. One final dive, nothing more. By midday, they were crossing the lake. The sky remained gray. Thunder echoed in the distance. Neither man spoke much. The atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. When they reached the deepest section, Marcus prepared his equipment. This time Daniel insisted on going with him. Marcus argued. Daniel refused. Minutes later, both men disappeared beneath the surface. The descent felt endless. Darkness surrounded them. Only their lights pierced the black water. 50 feet, 70 feet, 90 feet. The lake seemed deeper than it should have been. Then shapes emerged below. The submerged cabin. But it no longer rested flat on the lake bed. Its foundation had cracked apart. Large sections tilted upward, as though tremendous force had pushed from beneath. Daniel and Marcus exchanged nervous glances. Then they continued downward, past the cabin, toward the darkness below. That was when they saw it. The ferry. Daniel's breath caught. The vessel rested on the lake bed, almost perfectly intact. Far too intact. A ship submerged for decades should have collapsed long ago. Yet this ferry looked preserved. Frozen. Waiting. Its windows remained unbroken. Its structure remained solid. Even the faded lettering was visible. Blackwater Ferry. Marcus shined his light through one of the windows. The beam revealed rows of seats, luggage, personal belongings. Everything remained inside, exactly where it had been left, as though the passengers had disappeared instantly. Without warning, without explanation, Daniel felt a chill. The ferry did not look abandoned, it looked paused. The two men entered through a damaged doorway. Dust drifted through the water. Their lights swept across the interior. Suitcases, coats, children's toys. Everything appeared untouched. Then Daniel noticed something impossible. A newspaper resting on a seat. He picked it up carefully. The paper should have disintegrated decades ago. Instead, it remained perfectly preserved. The date printed on the front page made his stomach drop. It wasn't from 1968. It was dated 3 weeks in the future. Daniel stared at it, unable to understand. Marcus grabbed his arm suddenly. Pointing toward the far end of the passenger cabin, someone was standing there, a human silhouette, motionless, watching them. Daniel raised his light. The figure remained still, neither approaching nor retreating. Then it slowly turned and disappeared through a doorway. The two men followed. Their lights bounced across rusted walls. The corridor ended at a staircase leading downward, toward the lower deck, toward the deepest part of the ferry. Neither wanted to continue, yet both did. Step by step they descended. The temperature seemed colder. Even underwater, the sensation felt unnatural. Then they reached the engine room, and everything changed. The floor beneath them had cracked open. A massive fracture split the room in half. The opening continued downward, far below the ferry, far below the lake bed, far below anything that should have existed. Daniel aimed his light into the abyss. The beam vanished, swallowed by darkness. Then he saw them. Lights. Thousands of lights, stretching endlessly below, just as Walter described. Like a city beneath the lake, Marcus grabbed Daniel's arm, pointing downward. Movement. Something was rising. Slowly. Deliberately. The lights flickered. Then shadows appeared between them. Dozens. Hundreds. Human shapes moving upward through the darkness. Daniel's pulse exploded. The shadows continued rising. Toward the ferry. Toward the lake. Toward them. Suddenly, a loud metallic horn echoed through the water. The same sound from the future recording. The fairy horn. Ancient, deep, powerful. The entire wreck vibrated. Daniel looked around. The engine room instruments had activated. Lights flickered across old control panels. Gauges moved. Switches clicked. The ferry was somehow powering up. After nearly 60 years. Then a voice echoed through the water. Not through speakers. Not through equipment. Directly around them. A woman's voice. Soft. Calm. Terrifying. The crossing begins again. Marcus immediately signaled to leave. Daniel agreed. They turned toward the staircase. Then froze. Passengers stood there. Dozens of them. Silent figures blocking the exit. Men, women, children. Motionless, watching. The clothing matched photographs from 1968. Every face appeared pale, expressionless. None of them moved. None of them blinked. Daniel felt pure terror. Then he recognized one face. Eleanor Voss. The woman from the diner. Standing among the passengers. Looking exactly the same. She slowly raised one hand, pointing deeper into the fracture below, as if directing his attention. Daniel followed her gesture. Something enormous moved beneath the city of lights. Far larger than the ferry. Far larger than any structure. A shadow rising from unimaginable depths. Its outline impossible to understand. Its scale impossible to measure. Then every passenger spoke at once. Hundreds of voices merging together. One sentence. One warning. One final message. The door is opening. The lights below suddenly flared brighter than the sun, and the entire lake shook. The lake shook violently. A deep vibration rolled through the water. The ferry groaned around them. Metal twisted. Glass shattered, yet the vessel did not collapse. It felt as though something beneath the lake was awakening. Daniel and Marcus pushed past the silent passengers. For a moment the figures did nothing. They simply watched. Hundreds of pale eyes followed them. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the passengers vanished, gone. No movement, no footsteps, no sign they had ever been there. Only empty corridors remained. Daniel and Marcus swam upward as fast as they could. The ferry horn echoed again, louder this time. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. When they finally reached the surface, the storm had arrived. Black clouds covered the sky. Waves crashed against their boat. Lightning illuminated the lake. For a brief second, Daniel saw something impossible. Shapes moving beneath the water. Massive shapes, far larger than the ferry. Then darkness swallowed them again. The two men climbed aboard. Neither spoke during the trip back. Both knew they had crossed a line. Blackwater was no longer a mystery about missing people. It was something much larger, something impossible. Back at the motel, Daniel reviewed everything. The recordings, the photographs, the ferry, the passengers, the city beneath the lake. One fact stood above all the others: the voices. Every clue led back to the voices. For years he had assumed they were recordings, echoes from the past. But now he understood. The voices were not echoes, they were communications, messages moving across time. The realization changed everything. The lake wasn't replaying history, it was connecting different moments together. Past, present, future, all overlapping near Blackwater Lake. That explained the recordings, the photographs, the warnings, the future messages, the passengers, everything. The lake was an echo chamber for time itself. But one question remained. Why? Why Blackwater Lake? Daniel returned to the old cabin footage, frame by frame, hour after hour. Eventually, he noticed something hidden within the symbols carved into the walls. A repeating pattern. The same symbol appeared dozens of times. Daniel compared it against historical records, ancient maps, religious texts, folklore archives. At 3 in the morning, he found a match. The symbol represented a doorway, not a physical doorway, a passage, a crossing point, a place where separate worlds touched. Daniel's stomach tightened. Walter's story suddenly made sense. The ferry had not sunk. It had crossed. The passengers had not drowned. They had gone somewhere else. Somewhere connected to the city beneath the lake. And now that connection was opening again. A knock echoed from the motel door. Daniel jumped. 3 knocks. Slow, measured. Knock. 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 The exact same pattern. The same knocking heard beneath the cabin. The same knocking from the recordings. Silence followed. Daniel cautiously approached. He opened the door. No one stood outside. Only a small package rested on the floor, wrapped in old brown paper. His name was written across it. Daniel carried it inside. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a tape recorder. Ancient. Water damaged. Covered in algae, attached was a note. 3 words. Final recording. Daniel pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a familiar voice emerged. His own voice. Not from the future. Not from a few days ahead. Much further. Older. Weaker. The voice sounded exhausted, as though it had endured years of suffering. Daniel, the recording crackled. You were right. Daniel felt cold. His future self continued. The lake isn't remembering. A long pause followed. Then came the truth. It's reaching. Lightning flashed outside. Rain hammered the windows. The older voice continued. The doorway never closed. Daniel's heartbeat accelerated. It's been opening a little more every year. Static interrupted. The recording nearly ended. Then the voice returned. More desperate than before. They aren't trapped. Daniel froze. The same warning repeated throughout the investigation. The passengers, the voices, the disappearances. None of them were trapped. The final part of the message arrived. The part that changed everything. The older Daniel whispered, "They're trying to come back." The recording ended. Silence filled the room. Then a new sound emerged. A fairy horn. Outside. Daniel rushed to the window. The storm raged across the lake. Lightning illuminated the shoreline. And there it was. The Blackwater ferry. Not underwater, not on the lakebed. Floating on the surface. Exactly as it appeared in 1968. Its lights glowing through the rain. Its horn echoing through the darkness. Passengers filled the decks, standing motionless, watching the shore, watching the town, watching him. Then every light aboard the ferry switched on at once, and a single message appeared across Daniel's recorder. A message he had never typed. A message that should not have existed. Only 5 words. The crossing is tonight. The Blackwater ferry had returned. After nearly 60 years beneath the lake, it now floated on the surface, exactly as it appeared on the night it vanished. Rain lashed against the shoreline. Lightning illuminated the vessel. Hundreds of silent passengers stood on the decks, watching, waiting. The crossing was tonight. Daniel knew this was the end of the mystery, or the beginning of something worse. He gathered every piece of evidence, every recording, every photograph, every note. Then he drove toward the lake. The storm intensified with every mile. Trees bent beneath violent winds. Thunder shook the ground. The closer he came to Blackwater, the stronger the strange feeling became. Time itself seemed wrong. His watch stopped, then started again. His phone displayed different dates every few minutes. Past dates, future dates, impossible dates. Reality around the lake was breaking apart. When Daniel reached the shoreline, dozens of townspeople were already there, standing silently, watching the ferry. Among them stood Eleanor Voss, exactly as she appeared in 1968. Beside her stood dozens of other passengers. The same people from the old photographs. The same people who should have been dead. None of them looked older. None of them spoke. They simply watched the water. Then the ferry horn sounded again. A deep, ancient sound. The vessel slowly began moving. Not toward the town. Toward the northern channel. Toward the deepest section of Blackwater Lake. The doorway. Daniel knew he had to follow. He climbed into a small motorboat. Several townspeople tried to stop him. Others begged him to leave. Daniel ignored them. This investigation had cost too much already. He started the engine and headed into the storm. The ferry moved ahead through walls of rain. Lightning flashed constantly now. The lake surface churned violently. Then the impossible happened. The water began glowing. Thousands of lights appeared beneath the lake. The city, the same city Walter had seen decades earlier. The same city Daniel had seen beneath the ferry. Only now it was rising. Entire streets became visible beneath the water. Buildings, towers, bridges. An endless city stretching below Blackwater Lake. And it was moving upward. The ferry reached the center of the northern channel, then stopped. Everything became silent. The storm vanished. The wind vanished. Even the waves disappeared. The lake became perfectly still. Daniel looked around. The world felt frozen. Then the water opened. A circular void formed beneath the ferry. Dark, endless, impossible. A doorway, exactly as Walter described. The city lights poured upward from the darkness. Voices echoed across the lake. Thousands of voices, decades of voices, centuries of voices, all speaking together. Then the passengers began moving. For the first time, slowly, calmly, they walked toward the edges of the ferry, one by one. Then they stepped into the doorway, not falling, walking, as if descending invisible stairs, returning somewhere. Daniel watched in disbelief. The crossing had begun. The passengers weren't escaping. They were going home. Then Daniel noticed something. Not all the figures emerging from the doorway were passengers. Others were rising from below. Different figures, taller, darker, watching from the depths, waiting. The realization hit him instantly. The doorway worked both ways. Something wasn't just returning, something was arriving. A massive shadow rose beneath the opening, the same enormous shape he had seen under the city. Its true size became visible. It dwarfed the ferry, dwarfed the lake itself. The thing seemed less like a creature and more like a living piece of darkness, an intelligence, ancient, patient, watching. The voices around Daniel suddenly changed. Thousands became one voice, speaking directly to him. "We remember you." Daniel felt cold. The voice continued. "You have always been here." Memories flashed through his mind. Impossible memories. Fragments of lives he had never lived. Different years, different faces, different versions of himself standing beside Blackwater Lake. Again, and again, and again. The lake had not been connecting random moments. It had been connecting him, for reasons he still could not understand. Then Daniel remembered the recordings, the future warnings, the older version of himself. Every message had come from the same source, himself. He had been communicating across time, trying to stop this night, trying to prevent the crossing. And he had failed. The shadow beneath the doorway continued rising. The lake trembled. Reality itself seemed to distort around it. Daniel grabbed his recorder. If he could not stop what was happening, he could at least leave evidence behind. He began speaking, describing everything. The ferry, the doorway, the city, the shadow, the passengers. Every detail. Then the recorder crackled. A familiar voice answered. His own voice. From the future. One final time. "Leave the recorder." Daniel froze. The future voice continued. "It's the only thing that survives." The connection vanished. Daniel looked around. The ferry had almost disappeared into the doorway. The city lights were fading. The shadow was rising higher. The crossing was nearly complete. Daniel placed the recorder inside a waterproof case, then secured it inside his boat. The last thing he saw was Eleanor Voss standing on the ferry deck, watching him, smiling. Then the doorway expanded. A blinding light filled the lake. Everything vanished. The ferry, the city, the shadow, the storm, the lights, gone. Blackwater Lake became silent once more. When rescue teams arrived the next morning, Daniel Hart was missing. His boat drifted empty near the northern channel. No body was ever recovered. The official investigation concluded that he drowned during the storm. Most people accepted that explanation, but some did not. Because inside the boat they found the recorder, and one final audio file, created several hours after Daniel disappeared. The recording contained only his voice. Calm, distant, almost peaceful. His final message was short, only a few sentences. "I found the truth." A pause followed. Then came his final words. The words that would haunt Blackwater for years. The ferry never left. Static filled the recording. Then Daniel whispered one last sentence. A sentence nobody has ever explained. A sentence still heard occasionally by people standing beside Blackwater Lake after midnight. If you hear this, a long pause, then the final echo. Don't answer when your name is called.